We train classifiers on GAN outputs to learn artifacts, and then we modify the GAN training loss to fool these classifiers weighted by the coefficient phi. We do this in two settings: a low parameter setting where small DC GAN is trained on the MNIST dataset, and the high parameter setting where StyleGAN2 models are trained on the FFHQ dataset, and we use three different classifier architectures. We first show that the classifiers need to train with multiple generators to be able to generalize to unseen GANs. We then show that DC GAN is not able to fool held out classifiers without compromising output quality. StyleGAN2 models, on the other hand, can fool held out ResNet instances. We repeat this process for StyleGAN2 and ResNet, and we find that instead of the generators going to distinct artifact spaces, the instances reliably align on the same but a new space of artifacts, and the output quality is not affected. We now go over this work in detail. So GANs nowadays can generate realistic images at scale and at high resolution. In fact, GAN generated human faces have been used before to create fake profile photos on the internet. But what we already know is that generic GAN classifiers are actually quite effective at GAN outputs. And because the GANs are trained with a discriminator, there is a knowledge gap, manifesting as artifacts in the outputs. This collective space of artifacts, which is what is learned by the classifiers, is what we are calling an artifact space. In this work, we are training GANs against GAN classifiers to bridge this knowledge gap and study the effect on GAN outputs and the space of artifacts. So to go over the setup, we are training a number of GAN generators, initialized randomly but trained on the same dataset, same architecture but different, trained independently. And then we are training classifiers on samples from these trained GAN models. There's nothing special about the GAN classifiers. We are training on a balanced dataset of real and fake images, on generated images, and it's also balanced across the GAN instances. In the next step, we are modifying the GAN training loss to train new GANs that fool these classifiers. And we can repeat this process over iterations. So in each iteration, the classifier is trained on the generators from the same iteration, but the generator is trained to fool a classifier from every preceding iteration. So this new term includes one classifier from every preceding iteration, and then with this modification, the generator not only fools the co-trained discriminator, but also fools what's already learned by the classifiers. And this coefficient phi is used to weight the relative influence of the classifiers. To study the classifier generalization, we are incrementally increasing n, which is the number of generator instances included in the pool used for training the classifier. And then we evaluate on held out generators, none of which is used in training. With this setting, we find that even though for DC GAN we only need a few generators to generalize, for the StyleGAN2 setting we have sufficient diversity that we need to train on multiple instances to learn the space of artifacts. That's what's seen in the graphs. In the DC GAN setting, this 3 instances is sufficient, but for the StyleGAN2 settings, we need more than 10 generator instances for each classifier architecture to be able to detect a held out generator instance. We next measure the fooling performance. Again, we're training a number of classifier instances and then using one classifier included in the to fool in the GAN modified loss, and then we are measuring the accuracy using held out GAN classifiers not included in the modified loss. So with this setting, in the low parameter setting, we find that DC GAN is actually not able to fool held out classifiers, but StyleGAN2 is able to fool held out ResNet instances, but fails to fool held out MobileNet instances, which classifier which is a relatively low parameter classifier. So let's go over the DC GAN results. For low values of phi 10 minus 3 or minus 2, we are not able to fool the classifier used in the loss or the held out classifier, but as we increase the value of phi, we are able to fool the classifier included in the loss, but and also to some extent the held out classifier, but the GAN quality collapses as we increase phi. In the StyleGAN2 generators, we are able to fool ResNet 50 classifiers. So if we fool one ResNet 50 instance, we are able to fool held out ResNet instances as well, which means that across the instances we are learning an overlapping subset of artifacts. But what we also see is that if we fool one ResNet, we are not fooling an inception, and if we're fooling the inception, we're not fooling ResNet. So different architectures are learning different sets of artifacts. In this graph, we show that early on in the training is easily able to fool at a low value of phi 10 minus 3, and the rest of the training is guided by the discriminator. What we see with MobileNet is that fooling one MobileNet instance does not mean fooling held out MobileNet instances. Which means that there is not all the MobileNet instances are overlapping in terms of the artifacts learned. So to increase this probability of overlap, if we fool multiple MobileNet instances, we are able to fool held out MobileNet instances, which is what we see in this graph, is that we are as we include more MobileNet classifier instances, we are able to fool held out instances. After 5 instances, we are able to fool. This requires a small modification to the loss to include multiple MobileNet instances. We dig a bit further and we find that we find mutually fooling clusters where fooling one instance also fools other instances from the same cluster. So now we go to the key finding of subsequent iterations. So when we are using the StyleGAN2 and ResNet and training multiple iterations, what we find is that we are able to train multiple iterations where in every iteration the GAN is fooling the classifiers from the previous iterations. So iteration 3 will be able to fool classifier of 0, 1, 2, and the output quality is not affected either. So visually or the FID is not affected. But the converse is not always true. So the higher iteration classifiers can sometimes detect lower iteration generators, like here. What's interesting though is that across the diagonal we see that the classifier accuracy remains high, meaning that in the newer iterations the generators instances are aligning in the same space of artifacts. So from iteration 0 to 1, 1 to 2, it's not like the instances are going to distinct spaces of artifacts, but they're going to the same space of artifacts, which means that if you are asking the generator to remove a set of artifacts, it's going to the next best set of artifacts, which means that there's some kind of an artifact preference in this optimization. And this notion of preference is confirmed in the memoryless setting, where if you only fool the classifier from the immediately preceding iteration, you are not fooling the classifier from the iteration two iterations ago, and so it goes back to what it should have been. So now we summarize the results that the artifacts across different instances from the same architecture are shared. In the low parameter setting, you are not able to fool held out classifier instances. In the high parameter setting, however, you can fool held out instances, and then it moves to a new space of artifacts. This new space of artifacts is again shared by the different instances trained independently, and this hypothesis and then this means that there is some kind of an orderly preference, and this is reinforced in the memoryless setting. And the generators are unable to fool GAN classifiers of an unseen architecture. It means that different architecture learning different sets of artifacts. And in MobileNet, which is a low parameter classifier, we are seeing that different instances are learning different sets of artifacts. So to fool a held out instance, you have to fool multiple classifier instances. And then we also see there are mutually fooling clusters in MobileNet classifier instances. Thank you.